Welcome to Broken Hearts of Reddit. These are stories of betrayal, pain, and the loss of trust. This is a story about the day I realized that years of my life had been built upon the most fragile, elaborate lie, woven from the betrayal of my wife and my own brother, and that the younger son I loved with all my heart was not my own. Our home had always been my anchor, not just a collection of walls and a roof, but a living organism, breathing with warmth, laughter, and sometimes the quiet whisper of evening stories. My name is Mark, and my Sarah and I built it brick by brick, layer by layer, and each one was saturated with our love, our shared dreams. Together, we chose the color of the wallpaper for the kids' rooms, argued over morning coffee blends, and planned summer and winter vacations. We were a single, inseparable entity, or so I thought. Sarah. Her name itself was a synonym for tenderness, comfort, and assurance. Her smile could melt the coldest ice, and her laughter always reminded me of the chime of bells. I saw in her a pillar of strength, a friend, a passionate lover, and of course, the perfect mother to our two sons. Ethan, the older one, was 10, already so grown up, sensible beyond his years, with a perpetually inquisitive gaze. And Liam, the younger one, was only 6, a whirlwind of energy, a sunbeam who tirelessly demanded attention and affection. It was our perfect world, where every day was predictable and full of meaning. Mornings began with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the pancakes Sarah expertly made on weekends. I usually came down first, turned on the news, and then she would follow, embracing me, and that short but firm hug set the tone for the entire day. Then the boys would wake up, Ethan quietly, Liam with a thunderous stomp. Breakfast was always noisy, but joyful. I'd listen to their chatter. Sarah would tease my attempts to teach Liam how to hold a fork correctly, and all this chaos was for me the purest, most genuine happiness. My brother, David, was an integral part of this world. He wasn't married, had no children, and Sarah and I became a kind of center of gravity for him. He often stopped by after work to have dinner with us and play with the boys. David was a great uncle. He always brought some educational games or books, and the boys adored him, especially Liam. There was a special connection between them that I always considered just the strong bond between an uncle and his nephew. David was kind, reliable, and always ready to help. He was my right-hand man, my friend, the one I could trust with absolutely everything. Sometimes, when Sarah needed to be away, he would happily stay with the boys, and I felt completely at ease, knowing they were in safe hands. All of this seemed unbreakable. We would laugh at old family jokes, choose birthday gifts together, and share our plans for the future. Our evenings were filled with comfort. Sarah would read to the boys while I went through work papers, and then, in the quiet of a sleeping house, we could sit in the kitchen for a long time, sipping wine, discussing the small details of the day, or simply enjoying each other's silence. It was these moments, this routine, these habits, that formed my conviction that our life was the embodiment of a dream. But sometimes, very rarely, something subtle would slip into this flawless picture. A barely noticeable glitch in the matrix, a slight dissonance. One evening, as David was about to leave after dinner, I walked him to his car. Sarah was standing in the doorway, smiling, and in that moment, as David turned to wave goodbye, I caught their eyes. It was so fleeting, just a fraction of a second, but in that glance, there was something that didn't align with ordinary politeness, something too deep, too understanding. I chalked it up to my imagination, to fatigue after a long day. After all, they were close friends and relatives. It was natural that they understood each other without a word. There were other small things. For example, when Sarah would sometimes forget herself and call David not just David, but some affectionate nickname, which she would immediately correct. Or when I'd catch her mid-sentence while she was talking to him, and she'd abruptly fall silent as I entered the room. She would explain it by saying they were discussing a surprise for me or the boys, and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? My wife and my brother, the two people closest to me. We never kept secrets from each other. Sometimes I noticed that when David came over, Liam would become especially excited. It wasn't just the joy of a child seeing their uncle, but something more instinctive. He would literally cling to David, sit on his lap, hug him more tightly than he sometimes hugged me. I even used to joke with David, saying that Liam seemed to love him more than me. David would laugh, Sarah would smile, and it all seemed like just part of our family dynamic. Once, I remember, Sarah got the flu. This was a few months ago. Fever, weakness, a common cold. I took over all the chores and looked after the kids, but I had a lot of work. David, as always, volunteered to help. He spent almost the entire day with the boys while I was at the office, and even stayed the night to help with Liam, who wasn't sleeping well. I was so grateful to him for that. I remember walking into the kitchen late one evening, where he and Sarah were apparently drinking tea. They were sitting at the table in the semi-darkness, whispering. Their heads were tilted very close to each other. When I entered, they quickly pulled away, and for a moment, a strange emotion flickered across their faces, a mix of fright and guilt. But it was so quick that I immediately dismissed the thought. Sarah blamed a headache. David said they were discussing how to best organize a birthday surprise for Liam. And again, I believed them. How could I not? All these moments, these tiny, barely noticeable cracks, I then perceived as harmless oddities, easily explained in the context of close family relationships. They didn't disrupt the overall harmony or cause any serious suspicion. Rather, it was like a slight ripple on an otherwise perfectly calm surface. My mind refused to accept that a bottomless abyss could be hidden beneath that surface. I loved too much, trusted too much, to allow such a thought to enter my mind. And yet, these moments left a slight aftertaste, a barely perceptible hint of something alien that I couldn't identify, but which was beginning to slowly, imperceptibly seep into my once perfect world. Days passed, flowing smoothly into one another, and that slight ripple I had thought about became more distinct. It was something more than just fleeting oddities. They were now full-fledged, though still barely noticeable, inconsistencies that began to shake the foundation of my confidence. I started noticing how Sarah acted differently. Not drastically, no. Just differently. Her gaze sometimes became pensive, lost, as if she were far away in some secret world of her own. And I would catch myself thinking that this world wasn't connected to me. She became more cautious with her words, sometimes cutting off sentences midway if I entered the room. If she used to be able to talk for hours about how her day went, now her stories became fragmented, as if she were trying to avoid details. I would ask if everything was okay, if anything was bothering her. She always said everything was fine, that she was just tired or had a headache. I believed her, of course. But inside, something ached. David had changed, too. His visits became less regular, but more intense. if you could call it that. When he appeared, the atmosphere in the house changed. Some invisible tension arose between him and Sarah, which, like an inexperienced musician, I was just beginning to pick up on. It wasn't overt flirting, not obvious signs, but rather a language of the body, glances and touches that lasted just a little too long, which I had previously dismissed as just friendly or familial affection. I began to notice their coincidences. Sarah would suddenly be delayed at the supermarket when David accidentally happened to be nearby. Or he would unexpectedly stop by to drop something off when I wasn't home. The boys would often say, "Uncle David came over while you were at work." I never saw anything wrong with it. Why shouldn't my brother visit my wife and kids? But now, these coincidences began to seem suspiciously frequent. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. I was supposed to be late at the office, but the meeting was canceled. I was looking forward to a quiet evening with a book, while Sarah put the boys to bed. As I opened the door, I heard voices from the living room, Sarah's and David's. They were talking quietly, almost in a whisper. I felt a strange unease. I walked into the living room and caught them off guard. They were sitting on the couch, not too close, but their postures were somehow relaxed, intimate. Ethan and Liam were already asleep. When I entered, they both jumped. Sarah immediately straightened up, and David sharply moved away, as if he had been burned. In their eyes, I again saw that same subtle look I had seen before, a mix of fear and something else, something I didn't want to name. "Mark, you're early?" Sarah's voice sounded too loud, too faintly cheerful. "Yeah, the meeting was canceled," I replied, trying not to show my confusion. "What were you two talking about, so secretly?" David answered quickly, too quickly. "Oh, just about fishing plans. I wanted to invite you for the weekend, but Sarah said you already had something planned." Sarah chimed in. "Yes, we wanted to go to my parents'. Did you forget, honey?" I had indeed forgotten, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the sudden synchronicity of their answers, that unnatural coordination, which before would have reassured me, but now only intensified my anxiety. I started to comparing Sarah's behavior with David and with me. With David, she was more lively, more uninhibited. She laughed louder, her eyes shone brighter. With me, she was caring, loving, but her eyes no longer held that spark they once had. She had become more predictable, as if she was playing a role she had memorized. My suspicions began to turn into obsessive thoughts. I started to look more closely at Liam, at his facial features. He had light hair, like Sarah, and my eyes, or so I thought. David was a brunette, but he had the same features as Liam. The shape of his chin, his slightly prominent cheekbones, a specific shape of his ears that I had never noticed before, or didn't want to notice. Every time Liam smiled, I saw in that smile not only my Sarah, but also something of David. It was like an invisible mark that I was only now beginning to recognize. I felt paranoia slowly but surely taking over me. I began to analyze every gesture, every word. I remembered moments from the past that once seemed innocent, but now took on a sinister meaning. I remembered when Sarah was pregnant with Liam. She was very withdrawn then, often tired and irritable. I blamed it on hormones, and David was incredibly attentive. He would stop by almost daily, bring her fruit, help around the house, and take her to doctor's appointments when I was at work. I saw it as an expression of brotherly love and care for my wife. But what if it was something else? Most alarming of all was that I started noticing changes in Ethan. My older son, always so open and sociable, had become withdrawn. He often sat alone in his room, drawing something, but never showed me his pictures. His grades had dropped a bit, and he had become irritable, sometimes lashing out without a visible reason. I tried to talk to him, to ask what was wrong. He would always answer, "Nothing, Dad," or "Just tired." His eyes seemed so sad. They held a kind of grown-up pain that a 10-year-old boy shouldn't have to bear. I thought it was just the beginning of puberty, but something inside me told me it was more than that. And then came Ethan's birthday. He turned 10. We had a small party at home, invited a few of his friends, our parents, and, of course, David. Everything was as usual. Laughter, presents, a cake with candles. Liam ran around, making noise. David, as always, was the center of attention for the boys, especially Liam. But my gaze was fixed on Ethan. He smiled, accepted congratulations, but his eyes remained sad. He kept glancing at Sarah, then at David, then at Liam. And in those glances, there was something that made my heart clench. That evening, after the guests had left and we had put the boys to bed, I went into Ethan's room to say goodnight. He was lying under the covers, facing the wall. "Ethan, my boy, you seemed a bit sad today," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Is something bothering you?" He was silent for a long time. Then he turned to me. His eyes were full of tears. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Dad, you'll never leave us, right? You'll always be with us?" That question, asked with such desperate pleading, pierced me to the core. I hugged him tightly, feeling his small, trembling body. "Of course not, son. Where would I go? I love you guys more than anything. We're a family." Ethan hugged me back even tighter, burying his face in my chest. Mom said if I told you, you would leave." His words were barely audible, but they thundered in my head like a clap of thunder from a clear sky. Mom said, if I told you. What? What was he supposed to tell me? What did his mother do? I felt the world around me begin to slowly crumble. My heart pounded with panic, and an icy coldness ran through my body. I held my son, who was clearly carrying some unbearable burden, and I understood that whatever he was hiding was connected to his mother, and it was something that could destroy our family. Ethan's words, whispered in the darkness of his room, left me in a state of shock. Mom said, if I told you, you would leave. These words kept ringing in my head, drowning out all other sounds. I hugged Ethan even tighter, trying to soothe his trembling body, but I felt myself shaking from the inside. My son was carrying some terrible secret, and this secret was connected to Sarah, and to the threat that I would leave. What could he have seen or known that Sarah would use such a completely unacceptable manipulation? I sat by his bed for a long time, stroking his hair until he fell asleep. My mind refused to accept what had just happened. My Sarah, who had always been the embodiment of honesty and kindness, was manipulating our son, threatening him. It was unthinkable. But Ethan's desperate gaze, his trembling voice, his fear, all of it was too real. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay next to Sarah, feeling her even breathing, and I felt a wall growing between us, reaching for the heavens. Every breath she took, every movement, now seemed to me to be saturated with lies. I began to replay everything that had happened over the past few years. All those little things, those inconsistencies, those strange glances, all of it now came together into one horrifying picture that wasn't yet fully clear, but its outlines were already beginning to emerge. The next day, I decided to act. I couldn't live in ignorance anymore. In this atmosphere of suspicion and lies, I understood that confronting Sarah directly would be pointless. She would either deny it or shut down even more. I needed proof, or at least something that could confirm my worst fears. I started small. I began to pay attention to Sarah's schedule. She often said she was meeting friends or going to yoga. I decided to check. Once, I forgot something at home and came back an hour after she had left for yoga. Sarah's car was in the driveway. I called her and asked how her workout was. She said it was great, that her muscles were burning. A lie. Just a lie. I started watching David more closely. He began to avoid me. If before he could call just to chat, now his calls stopped. If I tried to contact him, he was busy or out of range. I felt a cold wave of betrayal begin to wash over me. My brother, my wife. Ethan became my unwitting ally. I didn't want to pressure him, but he himself seemed to be waiting for the moment when he could speak. He was still withdrawn, but sometimes, in rare moments when we were alone, he would look at me with a kind of plea. I tried to create a safe space for him, often telling him how much I loved him, how important it was to always tell the truth, no matter what. At the same time, I started looking at old photographs, wedding pictures, photos of Ethan, Liam, family portraits. I compared features. Liam, his resemblance to David. It wasn't just, it seemed so. It was obvious once you started looking. The shape of his nose, the curve of his lips, even the way he laughed. It all screamed David. I looked at photos of David as a child, his teenage pictures. The resemblance was striking. It was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. My younger son, my Liam, wasn't mine. This thought, like a sharp knife, cut me from the inside, causing unbearable pain. I remembered when Sarah was pregnant with Liam. All those weeks and months when she was distant, withdrawn. Her frequent trips to my mom's, which now seemed suspicious to me. The morning sickness she blamed on morning sickness, but which, I now understood, could have been a consequence of her secret life. And David, his excessive care, his constant presence. It wasn't a brother supporting a brother. It was a father taking care of his woman and his future child. I felt like a complete idiot, blinded by love and trust. One evening, when Sarah was out on an errand and Ethan and Liam were playing in their room, I decided to peek at their drawing album. Ethan had never shown me his drawings. I carefully opened it. On the first pages were ordinary children's drawings, cars, houses, family. But further in, were drawings that made my heart stop. One drawing showed Mom and Uncle David holding hands. Another showed Mom and Uncle David sitting very close on the couch. And in the background, Liam playing with toys. Ethan had drawn them not just as relatives. In these drawings, there was an intimacy, a tenderness that shocked me. And in some of the drawings, there was a sad-faced Ethan standing in the corner, separate from everyone. And on one page, in large children's letters, was written, "Mom said that if I told, Dad would leave." This was not just a trigger. It was an earthquake. My world collapsed. The words my son couldn't speak were expressed on paper. He saw, he knew, and he lived with that knowledge, with that weight, with that fear of losing me all these years. He was only 10. He was a hostage to his mother's lies. A feeling of shame, humiliation, and fury washed over me. I was betrayed by the people closest to me. My wife, my brother, my son, whom I thought was mine. I felt physically ill. Nausea rose in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I left Ethan's room, trying to stay calm. My heart was pounding like a trapped bird. I sat on the couch in the living room, trying to collect my thoughts. How long? How long had this been going on? From the very beginning? Before Liam was born? All these years they had been leading me on, living a double life, laughing in my face while I was busy building a future for us. I felt not only the pain of betrayal, but also a burning shame. Shame for my blindness, for my naivety. How could I not see? How could I not feel? My eyes were open, but I refused to see the truth because it was too ugly, too destructive. I was a fool who lived in a house of cards built on lies, and now that house was collapsing before my eyes. And the worst part, my older son was a witness to all of it, and he suffered in silence. It was unforgivable. The hours after I found Ethan's drawings were hell on earth for me. I sat on the couch, the album on my lap, and felt myself being torn apart. Fury, despair, pain, shame, it all mixed into one huge burning lump. My older son, my Ethan, was not just a witness. He was a victim of their dirty secret, their vile lie. He had to carry that burden, that threat, that fear of losing me. That was the most disgusting thing of all. Manipulating a child to hide their own baseness. When Sarah returned, her cheerful, "Hi, honey," sounded to me like an echo from a past life. I lifted my head. My gaze must have been something, because her smile immediately slid off her face. "What's wrong, Mark? You look a bit pale," she asked, and a note of anxiety was already in her voice. I didn't answer. I just held out the album to her. She took it, looked at the cover in confusion, and then opened it to that very page. I saw her face slowly change. First confusion, then realization, and finally, icy fear. She quickly flipped to the drawing of her and David, to the words, "Mom said that if I told, Dad would leave." Her eyes widened. She dropped the album on the floor. "Mark, I can explain." "Explain?" My voice was hollow, almost not my own. "What can you explain, Sarah? How you've been sleeping with my brother for years. How you forced our son to be silent by threatening him that I would leave. How dare you do that to Ethan?" Fury overflowed. I stood up, looking down at her. She cowered, looking pathetic, but I didn't feel a shred of pity. "It's not like that, Mark. You don't understand," she tried to say, but the words were stuck in her throat. "I don't understand." I laughed. It was a bitter, broken laugh. "And what am I supposed to understand, Sarah? That Liam is my son? No. I've seen his features. I've seen how he looks like David. All this time, Sarah. All these years. My brother. My own brother. I felt the world around me start to spin. My head swam with overwhelming pain and anger. I looked at her, at the woman who had been my life, and I saw a stranger before me. A monster who had destroyed everything I held dear. "You destroyed everything, Sarah. You betrayed me. You betrayed our children. You made Ethan a hostage to your dirty lies." She started crying. Her tears were a hollow sound to me. "Please, Mark. I didn't want to. I was confused." "Confused?" I gritted my teeth. "Confused for 6 years? It must have been very confusing when you were sleeping with him, when you had a child with him, when you looked me in the eye and lied every single day." At that moment, Ethan quietly walked into the room. Our shouting had woken him up. He stood in the doorway, Small, confused, and frightened, I looked at him, and the pain in my heart became unbearable. My child, who had seen all of this. Ethan, Sarah whispered, trying to approach him. Don't go near him, I roared. Don't you dare touch him. Ethan looked at me, his eyes full of tears. He already understood everything. He had been waiting for this moment. I walked over to him and knelt down. Son, tell me. Tell me everything. You don't have to hide anything anymore. Dad isn't going anywhere. Dad is here with you. Tell me. Ethan looked at Sarah, then at me. And finally, he cried. Bitterly, uncontrollably. He buried his face in my chest, and through his sobs, he began to speak. I saw Mom, with Uncle David, in the bedroom. When you were at work, I was little. I didn't understand at first. And then she said it was our secret. That if Dad found out, Dad would leave. I didn't want you to leave, Dad. I was scared. His words were like hammer blows to my head. He saw them. In our bedroom. My own home. My own bed. This wasn't just betrayal. It was the desecration of everything sacred. My child had witnessed this horror. Sarah stood with her hands over her face, her sobs shaking her body. But I didn't care. My world was centered on Ethan, on his pain, on his fear. When was this, son? I asked, trying to speak calmly so as not to frighten him even more. When Liam was little? And then, many times. When you went on trips? Or when Mom said she was going to see a friend? And our friends? I suddenly asked, remembering how they sometimes hinted at David and Sarah, how they smiled together, a little too familiarly. Did any of our friends know? Sarah lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen from tears. Some guessed. Mary. She tried to stop me. But you were too busy destroying my life, I finished for her. That was the worst of it. Not just her and David, but some of our mutual friends, some of the people in our circle also knew, and they said nothing. That was another knife plunged into my back. That evening, I learned everything. About their secret meetings that had gone on for years, even before Liam was born. About how they used my business trips, her errands, and activities to be together. About the second apartment David rented for himself. But where, it turned out, they often spent time. It was an entire, carefully constructed web of lies into which they had woven me, and, most horribly, our children. My brother. The man I trusted as I trusted myself. The man who was Ethan's godfather, who always seemed so kind, so decent. He didn't just sleep with my wife. He was the father of my younger son. He had destroyed my family from the inside, slowly, methodically, with cold cruelty. And I, the fool, didn't see it. I picked Ethan up in my arms and held him tight. Ethan, everything will be okay, son. Dad will get through this, and you will too. You're my hero. Thank you for telling me the truth. I looked at Sarah. Her gaze was full of despair, but I felt only emptiness. The pain had burned away all other emotions. Pack your things, Sarah. My voice was even, devoid of any emotion. I don't want to see you in this house. Not for another minute. I'm filing for divorce, and I'll deal with David myself. And rest assured, he will pay for everything. She tried to object, but I raised my hand. Not another word, just go, and don't you dare come near Ethan. As for Liam, we'll do a DNA test, and then everything will be clear. She fell to her knees, sobbing, begging, but her words were a hollow sound to me. The world I knew was dead, and I had to bury it to build something new, something real. for myself and for my sons. Destruction is not an instantaneous event. It's a process. It began with a thin crack, turned into a web, and now it had reached its climax, dropping the ruins of everything I considered my world upon me. But in those ruins, among the pain and debris, I felt a strange, new clarity. The pain was unbearable, but it was honest. Finally, I saw everything as it truly was. Sarah left that night. She packed a small suitcase, her movements slow and detached. She didn't look at me, and I didn't look at her. The only one she tried to hug goodbye was Liam, who was sleeping in his crib, unaware of the drama unfolding around him. I stopped her. "Don't touch him." My voice was as firm as stone. She pulled her hand back, her face contorting with a new wave of sobs. She left the house, slamming the door, and that door didn't just close on her, but on an entire era of my life. The morning was gray and heavy. Ethan slept longer than usual, emotionally exhausted. Liam, as always, woke up cheerful, not understanding that his world had changed too. I looked at him, at his carefree smile, at his eyes that so strongly resembled David's, and felt a strange mixture of tenderness and alienation. He was a child, innocent of everything, and he needed my protection, regardless of who his biological father was. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. I explained the situation as best I could, remaining calm. He was shocked. The divorce proceedings, the DNA test, it all felt mechanical, distant from the internal storm raging in my soul. Then came the call to David. I didn't shout. My voice was icy. "We need to talk," I said. He seemed to understand. Panic flashed in his voice. We agreed to meet at a neutral place, a cafe where we once often met as brothers. At the meeting, David looked haggard and scared. He tried to stammer out excuses, but I didn't give him a chance. "I know everything, David," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I know about Sarah. I know about Liam. And I know how you manipulated Ethan." He turned pale. "Mark, please, it's not what you think. I think you slept with my wife for years. I think you are the father of my younger son. I think you're a traitor, David, and you are no longer my brother." His eyes filled with tears. "Mark, I love her. I always loved her. And I loved her. And I trusted you. You destroyed 2 lives. You destroyed an entire family. You destroyed me." I placed an envelope on the table. "Here are the DNA test results, as expected. And here is a statement from my lawyer. I'm divorcing Sarah, and I'm suing for emotional damages and child support. And I want you to know, you will never see me or my sons again. You are dead to me, David. Absolutely dead." He tried to say something, but I stood up. "Our parents, they'll find out everything. Everything. And they'll know what you're really like." And I left. Without looking back. It was the hardest decision of my life, but it was necessary. The break with him was complete, final. The pain of losing my brother was almost as strong as the pain of losing my wife, but it was a pain that led to healing. After that, I focused on the children. Ethan was traumatized, but the fact that the secret was out lifted a huge burden from him. I spent hours with him, talking about how it wasn't his fault, that he was my bravest and strongest boy. I found a therapist for him, understanding that he needed professional help to get through this. We walked together, played games, read books. I tried to restore his faith in the world, in justice, in love. It was more difficult with Liam. I loved him with all my heart, as my son, and he was my son, not by blood, but by love. The DNA results confirmed that David was his father. But that didn't change my feelings for him. He was a little boy who needed a father, and I was that father. I decided to fight for him, for the right to be his father, his protector, his mentor. I was ready to go through all the legal hurdles to keep him in my life. My life was turned upside down. My home, once filled with a false happiness, was now a place for rebuilding. I stayed because it was my son's home, and I didn't want to deprive them of stability. But it was different. It held a deep psychological crack, a reminder of the betrayal. Every morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my heart, but also with the determination to move forward. I divorced Sarah. It was messy. She tried to portray me as the aggressor, but I had evidence, and Ethan's testimony, though unofficial, spoke for itself. She lost everything. Me, the children, the respect of our mutual friends. Some of them, those who knew, later came to me with apologies and support. It was a small comfort, but still. David disappeared from my life, and to my relief, from my sons' lives, he accepted his consequences. I can't say that I am happy. The word happiness now had a different shade for me. It was distorted, changed. But I felt free from the lies. I felt strong. I was a father who fought for his children, for their well-being, for their future. I was a man who survived betrayal, but wasn't broken by it. My heart carried scars, deep and painful. Ethan and Liam, they were my main motivators. My mission was to show them that even after the most terrible storms, you can see the sun again. I taught them that trust is a fragile thing, but love is an unbreakable force. My love for them was exactly that. This story is not about revenge or about destroying someone's life. It's about how I rebuilt my own life from the ashes, protecting my children, accepting the truth, no matter how bitter it was. I remained, but with a deep psychological crack. This was the price for years of blindness, for years of trust. But this crack, like a scar, reminded me that I survived, and that I would become stronger.